Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Traffic Commission hearing for February 16th to order. Members present: Frank Stringy, City Planner; Nicholas Rystrom, City Engineer; Fire Chief Chris Bright. The Police Chief is on his way. He'll be here momentarily. And if you could join me in a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on the agenda is to amend Schedule 8 of Title 10, Parking Restrictions Generally, by adding two 15-minute parking spaces at 75 Shirley Avenue, Monday through Friday, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Anyone here wish to speak in favor? Okay, I have spoken with Councilor Ira Novoselsky from the area, and he was unable to make it tonight, but he's in favor of this request. A new business has just moved in there. It's a juice bar, and there's going to be a lot of in and out, so he is in favor of this. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Hearing none. Any comments from the commission, or do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Number 2, to amend Schedule 11 of Title 10, handicapped person parking, by adding 33 D. Hone Street. Anyone wishing to speak in front for 33 D. Hone Street?
I had contacted Ralph DeChico, Commission on Disabilities. I had contacted the residents to see if he wanted to come up and speak on this one. As you can see by the pictures that I sent everyone, there is no driveway at this location. The driveway that you do see, if you notice, there's a fence there. There's a house that's tucked away in the back. That driveway is the access for that home in the back. So there's no driveway. He had sent in all his applications, medical documentation, copy of the registration. So if he had no outstanding parking tickets, and if it's the will of the Traffic Commission, I see that there is no problem granting this handicap sign application.
Thank you, Ralph. Is anyone here wishing to speak in opposition of this? Okay, Commission, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to accept the handicap parking for 33 De Hone.
Okay, thank you. Do I hear a second? Second. All in favor? Chief David Callahan has just joined us. Number 2, handicap person parking, 37 Barrett Street. Anyone wishing to speak in favor?
Mr. Chairman, Ralph DeChico, Fair Commission on Disabilities. As you can see from my notes, I put some detailed information on this. I actually have been trying to get in touch with this resident because of some issues that I see with information that was provided. I'm not sure if you've seen the information that you provided, that the registration of the vehicle was not registered at Revere, and they said they had changed it to Revere, and the documentation they sent from the registry does not clearly state that the vehicle is now registered at the Revere address. So I've been sending emails, trying to call, leave voicemails, but I haven't gotten a response. I told them it was coming up again for a public hearing today, but I haven't gotten no responses from them. Also, and I'm going to defer to Chief Bright on this. As you can see from the pictures, there is a fire hydrant located in front of the property. And also, I tried my best on putting the pictures there. There's also a curb cut angle to the driveway. So I do not believe that there is enough space. As you can see, there's a car that's parked there, but that car is parked illegally because there's not enough space away from a fire hydrant. So legally, I do not think we can put a handicap sign there. Somebody parks there, that's an illegally parked vehicle there. but I don't think that we legally can put a handicap sign there. But that is, again, the decision of the traffic commission. So I
Okay.
just don't think there's enough footage for a handicap spot.
Okay.
And along, I don't think there's enough footage to stay away from the fire hydrant.
Okay. All right, thank you. Do I hear a motion, I guess, to deny?
Well,
Or-
I think we should find out what the exact footage is without knowing it. It's
Okay,
just
so
estimating right now that it's
do
not.
you want to
doesn't
table
comply.
this, table this
Table.
until we hear from the resident?
Yeah, well, I believe you have to be 10 feet away from a fire hydrant,
Right.
correct, Chief Bright?
That would be a lot of room, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's the law, but.
The law, yeah, the law is 10 feet.
Okay, so we'll table this
Yeah,
until we
and-
hear from the resident.
Yeah.
Okay, tabled. Third item is updates for the traffic study conducted on the streets off Malden Street. Okay, Alex, if you'd like to try to give us some information. One of the complaints I got from last meeting, if you have any questions, please come up to the podium and speak into the mic. People watching from home couldn't hear the questions from the audience. They could only hear the response. So if you have a comment or a question, if you could come to the podium. But we'll hear from Alex first, when she gets settled.
See my screen? Not yet.
You were up there once. Oh,
Let's try this again. There we go. All right. Thank you all for attending. I just wanted to, introduce myself again. I'm Alex Sue. I'm from HNTB. I'm with the study team for this neighborhood traffic study. I'm joined here tonight by Paul Nelson, who will also come up and speak a little bit about some of our recommendations and thoughts. Also, Elena Ung will also be presenting on some of the measures that we're proposing. And then we also have Abby Corrado, who will be helping assist with any additional data that we need. Just to give a little bit of recap of what we heard, basically our agenda today, we want to recap what we heard at the last Traffic Commission meeting, some of the issues that the residents are finding. We have some additional data. I know we had some questions last time about some truck percentages and some more questions on speed, so we're going to present some of those things, some of our measures that we're proposing without specific locations, but some options that we have for the area, and then we'll take some input to go into our recommendations for the next meeting. So just a recap of the last meeting, we heard, some concerns about the Popeyes restaurant that's opening up on Derby Street, at the end of Derby Street over by Squire Road, and how that might impact some of the traffic on some of these neighborhood streets. We heard some complaints about speeding on some of the roadways, compliance with some of the stop signs at the intersections, heavy trucks and heavy vehicles along the different roadways, the school at Newhall Street, that there's a lot of, traffic that comes in the morning and the afternoons into the neighborhoods, potential causes for some of the traffic along some of these streets. Washington Avenue could be one of them when there's congestion on Washington Ave or any of the other major streets within the area. And then some concerns about lighting issues on the street as well. So, responding to some of the questions and concerns about the existing data. Last time we presented information about the 85th percentile speed, 85th percentile speed meaning 85% of the traffic on those roadways travel at that speed or lower. not saying that that's what everyone travels, so we just wanted to show you a graph of what that means. So you'll see kind of the higher bars here are showing that's your 20 to 25 mile per hour range. You'll see that there are cars that are traveling at 20 to 25 to 30 miles an hour, 30 to 35, and then you'll see, some of those lower bars in the end, there are people who are traveling 35 to 40 miles an hour, and even like some of those outliers maybe at night getting up to 40 to 45 miles an hour. So wanted to show you some of that data that we've seen, that there are people traveling at those higher speeds. They're much less in numbers, but there are people who are doing that. This is just an example showing Sigourney, Derby Street has those same trends as well as Charger Street. So wanted to give you an update on those numbers. Additionally, we had some questions or comments about truck percentages and buses that are on the street. So we wanted to give you an idea of the numbers that we're seeing. So again, on Augustus, Sigourney, Derby, and Charger, we kind of pulled out, how many buses were traveling on those streets. So small percentages, but there are those numbers, right? So when you have lower volumes, you're seeing that those numbers, could be 0.5%. On buses and then trucks as well. And obviously trucks are noisy, so, they make a big impact when you hear them on the street. So that's just kind of a recap of the existing data that we have. Obviously, we can take some more input at the end, but I'll have Paul come up to talk about some of the suggestions that we have for traffic calming.
Just a question, if you can go to that last.
Sure.
So like Augusta Street, the volume, 1,327.
Yep.
What is that?
That is all vehicles, so that includes
Over-
passenger cars. That's over the day, sorry. This is for an average weekday.
So these numbers are
Mm-hmm.
an average per day?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yep. 24 hour, yep. During the middle of the week, so a weekday,
Okay.
those are the numbers.
And the Saturday that you did those numbers trend up or trend down?
The Saturday trends a little bit down. The peaks happen a little bit differently,
Okay.
right? So during the weekday, you'll see a peak in the morning, you'll see a peak in the afternoon. On a Saturday, you'll just see kind of a constant kind of in the middle of the day.
Okay.
So
But overall,
the-
less cars on a Saturday than?
overall, less cars on a Saturday, but it may feel like it's more consistent because you're getting just even numbers of
Okay.
cars throughout the day,
Thank you.
pretty much. Okay, so we'll go to Paul. I think there, you can speak here. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. So what I wanted to present, thank you. So I'm just going to present a few slides here, but, based on the data that we took a look at and the feedback that we received, we wanted to introduce a few topics around, basically like groups of improvements that we could pursue before we get into the detailed application of those. And so the first concept that we think that would apply to this neighborhood and help out with some of the things that have been seen and we've seen in the data is the concept of traffic calming. And that's really just a combination of measures built into the street through signage, some changes maybe in how the streets are configured, how like the intersections are configured and things like that. But the idea is to encourage driver behavior that's safer, that's slower. There's proven countermeasures that you can do, and which ones you use really depend on the physical conditions of your street. But I think I'm covering all this. So, and being engineers, we kind of group them into these buckets of vertical, horizontal, deflection, and lane narrowing. But ultimately, the idea is to turn it into a place that slows cars down so that they're not, you're not seeing the speeds that many of you have observed and are concerned about. So if we can go on to the next one. So these are kind of the groups, and Elaine is going to show you some pictures and examples because I think those are a little bit easier to relate to. But kind of our menu of potential improvement options that could be used on a lot of these residential streets, looking at things like speed humps, speed cushions, kind of just two takes on the same thing. Looking at adding crosswalks that require, that are raised up so that you have that same bumping effect. So vertical deflection is anything that changes the elevation of the road, so you'd have to go slower over it. On the right column, horizontal deflection, that's anything that makes you weave to the left or to the right. Some streets that have on-street parking, they alternate it or something like that. You can also use center lane shifts. You can put mini roundabouts, something at the intersection so that people actually have to go around them instead of just stopping at a sign. And then there are things to look at street width reduction. You can, at the intersections, you can extend the curb. Oh, we lost. It's not lost there, if anybody wants to keep track. And then in the category of others, which are pretty popular, you've got speed feedback signs, and you could look at traffic circulation changes. So if you could go on to the next one. So speaking for traffic circulation, as you know, the existing streets are a series of one-ways, two-ways in different directions. And as the study team, we looked at the volumes that were recorded, and at this point, we wouldn't recommend pursuing improvements that change the circulation from what is there currently. Primarily because although there are higher volumes on Charger Street and on Sigourney Street, these aren't volumes that are outside the range of what you'd expect on a residential street. And so what we were thinking is that any change in circulation would really just complicate navigation, and especially with people having access to Google Maps, they find a way through. And so the other thing too is, we played this in a few scenarios looking at changing circulation. You have to kind of chase the problem because you change this circulation, so you say, oh, everybody's gonna move over to Derby Street, and then, well, we gotta change Derby Street and all that. And so we don't suggest that we pursue that as the first option, just because it doesn't seem like it's gonna get what you want out of this, and that by focusing on traffic calming measures that help slow cars and reduce that desire for cut through. I think there is a proven effect that if you do make the streets slower, a lot of those people that are just cutting through, some of those people would not. So you would see a reduction in volume most likely. And so to get into what some of those different, I think the next one's where we get into the pictures, right? Yeah. So I'll bring Elena up here and she can talk through what some of those look like.
Yeah, so like Paul said, the vertical deflections measures, these are the type of measure that raises the elevation of the road for various lengths so that it will be able to reduce the speed of the oncoming traffic. So things like speed humps, speed cushions, like raised crosswalks and intersections are some examples of vertical deflection measures. When implementing these, their effectiveness for speed reduction varies depending on where they're being installed. So their studies have shown that speed humps and speed cushions installations could reduce the speed of the road by 14 to 34%. So to implement these, for a quick implementation, we can opt in for prefabricated devices, and then just install it on the road. Like the two photos on the right, the top photo is the example of a rubber speed hump, and the bottom is an example of a rubber speed cushion. But the photo for the bottom left is an example of a constructed raised intersection. So if we want to go through with like this type of a measure, there are more design and infrastructure work involved, so it will take much longer to implement. Next slide, please. Okay, horizontal deflections. These are the type of measures that change the horizontal cross-section of the road. So lateral shift and chicanes are some really good examples of it. So chicanes are a series of alternating curb extensions that can either be constructed or we can use paint on the road with further enforcing measures. You can see an example photo on the top left. The chicanes are the painted zigzag pavement markings, and it's enhanced by the speed humps where the road curves, so that the cars wouldn't just speed through and actually follow the road curve. Another example would be the bottom left. It's a two-way street which uses on-street parking as chicanes. Looking at the photo, you can see that like on-street parking starts from the right side, and then after a few hundred feet, it switches to the left, and then the road curves along with it. I think it skipped, yeah. Okay, street width reduction, so just in general, when the roads are wide or feels wide, drivers have the more confident to speed through it. So there are a variety of treatment measures to achieve the street width reduction, and some examples would be corner extensions, road diet, on-street parking, and painted edge lines. So we can actually opt in for a much quicker implementation of these by going the painted and the rubber curbed routes, or we can implement them through much larger infrastructure work, like in construction work, which would take much longer to implement. So, these are like the other applicable measures that we could implement. There would be like speed feedback signs and optical markings. Also at the last meeting, we heard that there's been stop sign running issues been happening. So for that, we can use like an enhanced stop sign controls, like the photo on the bottom right corner of the slide. Those can increase the visibility of the stop signs.
Great, so you'll see that, we kind of wanted to come up with a couple different measures that could be implemented in varying degrees, things that could be implemented quickly, some things that would, take a little bit longer to design. We know that, obviously there's immediate concern of some things, so we wanted to give options in varying degrees of implementation. So we wanted to really get your feedback today on things that you liked, things that if you live on Derby Street or you live on Sigourney, things that you would like to see on your street, and we can kind of take that into consideration. We didn't want to come in today's meeting and say, we're going to implement these things everywhere. We wanted to get feedback on what are some measures that you see could be effective on your streets. So wanted to open that up for discussion. We have like a timeline. So basically here today, we wanted to give you some of the different traffic calming options with next month's meeting being actually showing where we could implement them and having more specific ideas of where they could fit. So with that, I can open it up for questions.
Does anyone have a question? Please approach the podium, just so everyone at home can hear your question.
Hi, Dan Forty, 18 Sigourney Street. I guess the part I'm confused about is the main focus of this was the traffic volume, not necessarily the speed. So, we know that there's always going to be people speeding up the streets. If you look at the streets, being Augusta, Sigourney, Derby, they're one-lane streets.
Excuse me, sir, can you talk into the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just turn away from you.
They're one-lane streets with people parking on both sides. So how we would ever put anything on the sides to deviate from people speeding up, I guess I'm confused by that. And I know you addressed the issue of not making traffic changes, and that was the patterns you see were normal amounts of traffic. But when you looked at the streets across, you have 1,200, 1,300, and then Sigourney, 2,500. So I don't feel that that's a normal amount of traffic for a one-lane street, unless I'm missing something. That's just my opinion. So I think we need to really focus on the volume versus the speed. That's all I had.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to respond to that?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, just to kind of go back to, what our recommendations were in terms of when we were looking at the data, and we presented it last time, we were showing that 75% of the traffic that's traveling this neighborhood are from the neighborhood, are going to destinations in the neighborhood. So obviously, there are concerns about cut-throughs, and some streets have more volume than others. As Paul mentioned before, once we start looking at changing streets, we're never going to get into a situation where every single street is going to have the same exact number of traffic, just because of the connections that are, at Squire Road and at Malden Street. If we make changes, volumes are gonna just shift to the following street and then shift to the other street. So our first approach, not saying that that's not an option to look at in the future, but our first step would be to deter people using traffic calming measures, because by requiring vehicles to slow down, we can also see those people that are just cutting through, as much as they're very small volumes that are potentially cutting through. That is where we'll see some of the reduction, because if we add, measures such as speed humps and things like that, it's going to become a slower and less desirable route for those vehicles, so.
Thank you. Turn on your mic.
Kelly Resendez, 75 Grover Street, Revere. Same as him. This was supposed to be done for volume of traffic. And you're saying that it's mostly people in the neighborhood using those streets? And I would disagree with that. And on top of it all, once the Popeyes goes there, and now you did the traffic study, you see the way the traffic goes, your easiest way to go out of Popeyes is going to be going up Derby, Grover Street, back down Sigourney, and wherever you're going. So that's going to bring way more cars than we're getting now. This was one of the purposes of this traffic study. Another thing I would have an issue with is, I'm all for safety and stop signs, but I'm on the corner and I have 2 stop signs. The last thing I want is a blinking stop sign in my living room. And paint on the ground is great at first, wears off, nobody follows it. I mean, I just think there needs to be a little bit more than what you're suggesting out there. And I think Derby's numbers are really off from what we really get. Because when you did the study, we had a horrible rainstorm. Not only did we have a horrible rainstorm and there wasn't a lot of cars out that Friday, that street had just got turned around about 3 weeks before that, maybe, or whatever, and people still thought they couldn't go up that street. So I do think Derby's numbers are off from what the other streets are, but I really think this is about volume. I know people need to slow down too, but it's really about the amount of volume that those streets are getting. Because people from the other side of Revere, and they live there and they can use the streets, but everyone is going through that neighborhood. It's just not fair. So I would suggest looking at the volume on top of looking at what you're already looking at. That's all.
Hi, Adele Cataldo, 38 Sigourney Street. We were speaking about volume. However, I have a question. The speed tables, and I agree with Kelly, the signs, that don't stop it. Even the speed bumps, there's one on Cushman Ave. There's one. Everybody speeds, and when they see the flashing light, they stop. And they go slow, and they hit the gas. So if you were gonna do this, who's funding this? You?
Well, the city would fund it if,
So the city would pay for all of these changes?
some, depending, once we decide on what we think would be the best option, then it would be up to the city council and the mayor to fund the request.
Or wouldn't it be cheaper to just stick with volume?
So when you say volume, and I understand that's the biggest concern, so cars are coming there. I don't know how the volume of cars going into that neighborhood can be reduced. If you make streets do not enter, for instance, and I think one of the comments on the sheet was you make winners and losers. And I think we went into that the last time. You couldn't enter Sigourney and you couldn't enter Derby. So those cars then moved to the other streets and started maneuvering around through the neighborhoods trying to find their way to either Squire Road or to Malden Street. So the volume of cars shifting it around from one street to another, again, and the comment seemed accurate, you create winners and losers. The volume of traffic, the cars coming and desiring to pass through there, that's a tough thing to stop or control. You can make some do not enter streets, of course, but the one you make do not enter moves the traffic to the next one. So that's a puzzle that is going to be hard to figure out.
I know, but there's winners and losers in everything, and
Right,
the problem is the streets that have the most volume
Right.
want relief.
right.
So the experts should be working on that.
So Sigourney and Charger obviously are going to get the most traffic volume because people want to get to Squire Road and they want to pass over and get to the Market Basket or whatever they want to do. So those intersections are there. I don't see the state doing anything to close those down or anything. So, can you reverse the direction, of Sigourney Street and have people coming out of Market Basket and then using it as a cut-through sail across and use it to go to Malden Street? You may enter, same thing with Charger Street. You may, if you reverse the direction of it, people are still coming through that intersection. So volume is very tough to control and make everyone in the neighborhood happy because the volume is still coming. So that's a very tough road to go down.
Okay, Alex, I have a question for you. Who said there was only 4 trucks, four buses that come up Sigourney?
That was just through the data. We understand that there is some level of, there could be more, there could be less. Those were average numbers.
Average and definite is 2 different things, because there's more trucks and more buses than what's saying. And what data showed us that it's just the people that live in Revere, not cutting through to Northgate, to Route 1.
So in terms of when I said 75%, that was through the data that we had collected from origin destinations, right? So that showed that the majority of people, yes, there is some level of error using, big data like that. But they're not necessarily just coming from, the area bounded by Malden and Squire in that neighborhood, but it's coming from the areas that don't have other access to major roadways, so areas south of Malden and those areas of Revere as well.
So in other words, people from Mountain Ave or Park Ave or, are using that rather than go to Washington Ave or down Broadway. They're cutting through the streets, coming out onto Malden Street and taking those two. It's more desirous than.
Right, and as far as Newhall Street, that's a school. So all schools must have a high volume.
So we're trying to figure this out, but like I said, it's a big puzzle up there, and
Mr. Chairman, sorry I wasn't at the last meeting. I just have a question, and you took the words out of my mouth. The state is not going to change closing the Squire Road. But, and I know certain things that have to get done there have to get approval from the state, but would the state have to approve if we were to, the bottom of Sigourney Street and Charger Street, make it right turn onlys and not allow them to go through, let them keep the opening, right turn only? This way, that would just eliminate people from maybe using those streets as much and they can't go straight through. And that will defer them from going down, because they still have to protrude going all the way around. And maybe they will stay on Broadway or stay on a different way.
So you're saying discourage people?
From going
You can
straight
still
on,
get to
take a
Squire
left.
Road, but you couldn't
You
cut
have to go
across.
take a right only off of Charger Street and off of Sigourney. So you have only right turn only, no going straight, no turning left. So that you're trying to keep people to stay on the main road. And that may deter people from using those streets as a cut-through. And if they go, most people, I know the main thing with Popeyes is people are gonna be coming off the highway, going into Popeyes, coming back on, then wanting to go up Derby, go around Sigourney, to come out of Sigourney, take a left to go wherever. Now they wouldn't be able to do that, so that's gonna discourage them and keep them on Squire Road. But I don't know if that's
positively a
state
question for the state.
So if they
We can
don't,
certainly
that
pursue
may
that.
help.
It's not a bad idea.
Deter people from using those streets.
But yeah, something like that would require, because the state does own that traffic signal, any circulation changes that impact that intersection would have to, they would need that input, with those, yes.
So that's a interesting suggestion, and we could certainly pursue that with the state, see how they felt about it. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Michelle Kelly, Derby Road. I don't even know where to begin because I'm so disappointed with what I'm hearing. I thought we were paying $25,000. We were very concerned about volume, and we couldn't really figure out the right way to handle this, so we were going to call in some experts. And with no disrespect, but I'm just disappointed that what I'm hearing so far has to do with like signs and speed bumps. And we could have come up with that on our own if we thought that that would have really did the trick here, and it's not going to. I think the suggestion we just heard is fantastic, and yet that's coming from somebody right here and not the engineering firm, so I just want to point that out. But in terms of just pushing traffic to other streets and things like that, I want to know if we're going to be stuck on the numbers that the engineering company came up with, and we're just going to disregard the numbers that we had in the summer, how are we going to reconcile that discrepancy? Because it's a big discrepancy. They're getting about 1,000 cars, we got about 1,500 to 1,800.
Okay.
I'm not going to go with 1,000 cars, and I don't believe 1,500 to 1,800 cars a day is normal for a residential neighborhood, and I don't believe that that's just people that live in that little neighborhood. That doesn't make sense. So how are we going to reconcile that? Because I don't think we should be relying on that.
I believe they looked at that data. I'll let Alex speak on that.
Yep, we did take a look at that data. We have not been able to get a contact for ATS yet at this moment. But there were some inconsistencies in we did receive the counts that were taken in the summer, and we did see some inconsistencies in the numbers that we're trying to figure out what they mean, because there are some.
But with all due respect, we have reasons as to why there was such a discrepancy, but no one seems to be listening. Because everybody in the area, because they weren't able to come down Derby Road for 30 days,
Sure.
the new change was just enacted, was just put into effect, so people weren't really aware, oh, I can go down Derby Road again. So that's probably making up most of that discrepancy, and the fact that you did it for a shorter period of time, and the fact that we had a rainstorm during that period of time. I mean, I'm going to be relying on data that was done over a period of 30 days before I'm going to be relying on data that was done over a period of a few days.
Sure, I would like to clarify the inconsistencies in the data that we found wasn't in comparison to the data that we collected. It was within the data within those months themselves that we were trying to understand why there were some of those inconsistencies.
So you're saying that, in other words, that your data is correct and our data that we did over 30 days had
I'm not saying that. I'm
inconsistencies?
saying that we still need to have correspondence with the company that collected the count so we can understand why the numbers
And the
were in
reasons that
data.
we're giving you for the discrepancy is just going to not be considered.
We're not saying that it's the inconsistencies with the data that we took. It's within the data itself, right? So when we looked at the data, we saw that there were huge gaps missing, and then all of the data was selected and put into a specific hour of the day, and so there wasn't a trend of data. So we were finding errors within the data that we could not figure out how we could compare it to even the data that we
So
took.
would it be a possibility then to run your data again? To do your tests again? Because
is something-
1,800 cars to 1,000 cars is a huge discrepancy.
Yes, there is a possibility of taking a couple more of these streets, not so much of a widespread thing that we did the last time, but coming in for 3 or 4 streets and retesting is not out of the question.
Okay.
No?
I think we'd all feel more comfortable with that, because we're not going to rely on that. It's just too much of a discrepancy there. Also.
So in your opinion, what would be the best, this is the winter, March maybe?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have the answers. I'm not an expert, but all I
Right.
know is 1,800 to 1,000 just seems to be way off. And so if we're going to rely on that 1,000 and just disregard the whole, because I know I'm getting more like 1,800 cars a day than 1,000. I know that. I live there. I've lived there for almost 30 years.
Okay.
So it is what it is, but that just needs to be reconciled, in my opinion, in order to feel confident on any measures that are going to be suggested.
Okay.
The other thing is that I know that we said we don't want to push traffic to different streets and then other people suffer and all that. But Gore and Derby are the only 2 streets coming off of Squire that allow traffic. All the other streets are blocked off. They don't allow traffic off of Squire. Why couldn't Derby and Gore also become streets that do not allow traffic to come down from Squire? And that way, it's going to force the traffic down to either Patriots Parkway or the Circle. Patriots Parkway and the Circle are built for that. It's not a residential neighborhood. Patriots Parkway is wide. It's, you know, I mean, it was built for that reason. So blocking off Derby and Gore would push everything down there. It wouldn't be pushing it onto another residential side street, like, you know, from Derby to Gore or whatever. All the other streets are blocked off. So, I mean, that's something that has to be considered. And
Right,
again,
so I had spoken to the traffic engineers about Derby Road, reversing the direction of Derby Road. And the intersection at Malden, Rumney, and Derby really doesn't lend itself to having cars coming up from Malden because of that, how Rumney empties out right at that intersection.
But we would only go as far as the stop sign to Grover, not all the way down to Malden. We would only reverse direction to
So
Grover.
your thought is making Derby Road accessible only from Grover Street?
Correct,
Okay.
correct, because, I mean, Orvis is the one way that way, the whole way from Malden Street, but you could keep the lower part of Derby open for, you know, from Malden. But again, these are the things that we were kind of hoping, the way traffic exits from Northgate, the way, I mean, we were hoping that this study would be looking at those issues, those, you know, big things that we're not experts in, that may be a little too hard for us to do. I think almost everybody in this room, that's what we were led to believe, and that's what we were hoping for. So I think just hearing about, you know, signs and speed bumps and stuff, it's just falling real short. And I mean, and now to hear some of these, what I'm hearing is just that, no, these things are completely off the table. We can't change traffic patterns and things like that.
Nothing is off the table. This was a measure that was suggested rather than sending cars scrambling through different streets. So nothing is off the table. This is an ongoing thing. There'll be a couple more meetings, and we're going to work this thing out until we come up with something that's
Okay.
good for the whole neighborhood.
All right, thank you.
The intent of these measures that we were proposing today was to be a first step, right? First step, and we were discussing things that could be implemented quickly, right? So things that could be done soon. We know that there are, you know, issues with, you know, traffic circulation and traffic volumes. These measures will help deter some of those folks, not just from speeding, but also from traveling along those roadways. And we would implement these measures in conjunction with several of them. It wouldn't just be one street with one measure. We would like to have some uniformity. But this was just a first pass. We did talk about, you know, when Popeyes comes in, looking at the reversal of Derby Street and looking at some other changes once those happen. It's hard for us to predict at this moment what is going to happen when Popeyes does open. So to preemptively make some changes without seeing what the impacts are is difficult for us.
excuse me, but we were promised by our city councilor to hopefully have a plan in place before Popeyes opened, before they even had shovels in the ground, I believe was the phrase that was used. They've already started work on Popeyes right now. So, I mean, now this is a completely different trajectory of telling us, well, we're gonna have to wait and see what the impact actually is from Popeyes before we do something. I mean, that might be the case right now, but that's completely different from what we were told. We were told from our ward council, and are you still there, Ricky, right? You said that, right?
Not by the time shovels were in the ground, but by the time Popeyes opened later this year, by the end of the summer, early fall, I was hoping to have these recommendations.
Right, so I don't recall saying that, we were gonna wait until Popeyes opened, then see what kind of an impact that was gonna have, and then discuss some changes. We have a terrible impact right now without Popeyes. We have a problem right now without Popeyes. Even if Popeyes wasn't going in, we're having higher than normal residential volume of traffic. We know Popeyes is gonna exacerbate it. We don't need to wait for that, so that's all I wanna say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ricky Serino, or Richard Serino, Ward 6 City Councilor. I want to thank you and the traffic engineers for taking a look at this, and I do have to say, ironically enough, I do somewhat agree with Mrs. Kelly. I was really hoping that this traffic study would look at Northgate especially, and how the traffic going into and out of Northgate impacts the streets along Squire Road from Malden Street. And one thing, I appreciated Mr. DeChico's suggestions. I think that could be something that could be looked at. Something I wanted to ask was, a resident a few meetings back had suggested opening up Patriot Parkway at the intersection of Squire Road to allow for another across Squire Road access point. And I was wondering if you could run your data to see cars coming up Malden Street from the Broadway area, going toward Charger, Sigourney, and, coming up Squire Road from Derby. If there's a way to run data to see how an additional intersection at Patriot Parkway and Squire Road would alleviate some of that traffic that Charger Street and Sigourney and Derby see. Additionally, I know the previous speaker had said that you could only come up Derby Road, and there's another concern that a lot of residents who live on Lantern Road seem to be, the forgotten ones as well. A lot of traffic exiting Northgate from the other side of the intersection are actually going up Lantern Road. And Lantern Road, it splits, and there's Steeple Street. Steeple Street is a one-way coming down Malden Street towards Squire Road, and they're seeing people going up there one way, the wrong way. So it's not just Derby. Derby, obviously, I no doubt does take the brunt of it because it is the first one right after Northgate. But there is Gore Road, and then there is Lantern Road, and then Patriot Parkway as well. People go up. The Patriot Parkway is wider, and I don't think there are as many problems down there. But if we could look at the data to try to see what an opened up Patriot Parkway across Squire Road would look like. And I truly am hoping, and I really would like to, with due respect to the commission, to hold you to this, that we do have an implementation of some sort before Popeyes opens. I never said when shovels were in the ground, because shovels in the ground are, coming soon in the early spring. But definitely by the time Popeyes opens, I want to have something in place that can try to alleviate some of this. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Counselor. Does anyone else wish to speak? Sir? Oh, excuse me.
Dan Forty, 18 Sigourney Street. Going back to what this gentleman said, we talked about this in some of the previous meetings of possibly putting a barrier between Squire Road and cutting across. I think the biggest issue with Sigourney Street and possibly Charger Street is that we're the outlet for two different things. We're the outlet for Northgate, we're the outlet for Route 1 North. So, maybe looking at that, if we were to take one of those out of the equation, that would, there's no way we're gonna get no traffic. Unless you shut down the intersection across, we're not gonna accomplish that. So we have to do something, and obviously passing it on to the next street isn't gonna be, so if we were to take half that equation out, my only fear with that is, will we be seeing a major backup of either Route 1 or Northgate? So I think what we have to do is we have to look at where can we put another split in Squire Road to cut across, whether it's Patriots Parkway or whatever, but I think if we took Sigourney Street and either made it useful for Route 1 or Northgate, that depends on what the residents want. But then we also have to accommodate for what are we doing for that part we cut off? So maybe another split would help with maybe the Route 1 North. Or maybe we take on Route 1 North, and because the split is further down Squire Road, that becomes a new entrance to Northgate. That's just an idea I thought maybe we could take into consideration based on what he
So
said.
I think the traffic engineers are trying to give us some things to hang our hat on immediately. These suggestions are great with the split and everything else, but dealing with the state, that's something probably years down the road. You know, that's not something that is gonna happen this summer. So we could start talks with them about certain measures to take, you know, to do this, but that's a long time away.
So
We wanna do something fairly quickly here to
Correct.
try and start addressing it.
So the bottom of Sigourney Street on the Squire Road part, if you made that a right turn only, that would be needed to be approved by the state.
Right, because that's traffic signalization, and we can't just put up a sign, right turn only.
So I guess the same would hold true for closing off Derby Road then. That's gonna be another issue, if we tried to do that.
Well, Derby Road doesn't involve
Is it a traffic
signalization.
signal?
Oh, it don't even involve signals.
Yeah, so that's a major change by the state, and that, you know, they'd be studying that for for a long time, you know, so that's a great suggestion. We can start that process, but what do we do, you know, 2 months from now? What do we do prior to Popeyes?
Yeah,
Correct, because I think a lot of the data, again, the data you had done, you know, the summertime, it ramps up big time because everybody's going to the beach and everybody's coming from other places. They're cutting up Sigourney, taking a right on to Squire Road, headed straight down to the beach and back again. And I think that's where maybe the big discrepancy is too with the volume. I know the Revere Traffic Department did that maybe in the summertime or just as the summertime was starting. So I think there's a lot of reasons why there's discrepancies there.
And I wanted to reiterate that that's exactly right. We wanted to think of things that could be done immediately. Patriot Parkway, opening that up was something we had talked about a while ago, but obviously that would be a much larger effort. Other things that we looked at was the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan that was set in place a few years ago. And looking at some of those things, I know there was some recommendations on Malden Street. You know, we were trying to propose things and recommend things that were not a part of those plans that were already in place that would have some calming effects for the area if you make Malden Street more of a gateway. I know that's kind of an area where people are cutting through Malden and getting through the neighborhood. So if any of those changes, obviously those are larger type improvements, will take a longer time for those to be implemented, but obviously some of those things could help with the cut-through traffic as well by calming those streets, making the entrance to the neighborhood more of a gateway, so that it looks like a neighborhood, that it's not like cut-through streets.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of some of the longer-term things, but tonight's intention was to come up with measures that, and present measures that could be implemented quickly.
Thank you.
Kelly Resendez, 75 Grover Street. So if you could give me what you're going to do to Derby Street to prevent people from going up that. So what your study, what's your plan for Derby Street?
What our intention today was to show you what the options were that we can apply globally. We can apply on certain streets that are in certain one-ways, get your feedback on what some of those implementation measures were, and then be able to recommend specifically street by street
So-
by the next meeting.
So if I'm hearing you right, and correct me if I'm wrong, your plan is to make the street less wider on certain streets?
Some streets, those are options.
So what prevents people from using that street? Because I can tell you, just because you're gonna make the street smaller, I'd still use the street. Would everybody still use the street? And there's no sidewalks on Derby Street. There's no sidewalks in that neighborhood besides the new construction, the houses with new construction. So people park along that already. So I'm not really understanding, like, besides putting a speed bump, what this whole thing was for. I'm just being very honest.
Yeah, in terms of, we understand that there are some narrow streets and that there are people who park on the street. And so when there's no one parked on the street, it just looks very wide and people can
But there's
see.
never not anybody
Right.
parked on the street. And I'm just curious, have you guys actually drove this area
We have.
yourself? So you know that there's no one never not parked on that street.
There are segments where there are streets where people aren't parked on the street.
I'd be shocked to find where that is, but, all right. But it just doesn't sound like you have a good enough plan to stop the traffic from flowing through that. Yes, you have a plan to stop the speed bumping, the speed. Yes, the speed bumps would do that, and I give you that. But for anything else, I mean, it just doesn't sound like you have the plan for that. That's my opinion, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Joanne, please.
Joanne Janino, 14 Sigourney Street, Revere. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I'd like to ask, has anyone who worked on this survey actually come to our neighborhood? Have you been in my neighborhood? Have you been
Yes.
on Sigourney Street?
We've driven all the streets.
All right. I'd like to invite you to come to my house for 1 week and work from there. Bring your little computer with you and just observe that, how much traffic we actually do have and how they come around that corner. For you to say that 2 trucks, like Adele said, or 2 buses, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But if you came there, and the people who worked on this with you I'm inviting you, I live in the first house on the street, right? I'm inviting you to come work out of my house and do your survey and see what really is going on in my neighborhood, as opposed to sitting in a room, looking at a map, showing pictures. I mean, what good is that, really? I can't see how, that's like the crosswalks they draw. They make all these crazy crosswalks. They never even went across the street to see where they're putting them. And they just draw lines every place. It's kind of ridiculous. And our streets are too narrow to have any lines or bumps or anything like that. People park on both sides of the street at night. Drive it at night and look and see what the neighborhood looks like. Not in the daytime when people go to work. And that's an open invitation. Anyone in your organization, come to my house. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to make comment? Okay.
Do you actually know how wide Sigourney Street is? Anybody know? Does anybody know how wide Sigourney Street is?
I mean, to put it into perspective, I know that when the plow comes up, if the cars that are on this side, the plow just fits. So however wide the plow.
That's right, because.
Yeah, it's a 40-foot
On the
right
left-
away.
the left-
40-foot right away.
Okay, because the left-hand side where I am, that's all on a slant. We all park on that slant. if we all parked on both sides in the street, no one's gonna be able to fit up the street. It's too small. No. If if both sides were parked like that, we wouldn't fit. Okay, thank you.
Okay, are we all set? So, moving forward, I'll ask the traffic engineers to try and reconcile those numbers from the other traffic count that the police department did several months ago. They'll contact that company and try to reconcile those numbers. Moving forward, the next meeting, the traffic engineers, we will take another look at Derby Road and what measures can be taken. Like I say, Derby Road, I know there's a lot of residents here from Derby Road. If we make that do not enter, the traffic goes to Gore. So if we make that do not enter, there's not a lot of people here from Gore Road. I don't know how they would feel about that. Those are things we're going to have to look at. We're going to continue this process. We're not giving up. The traffic engineers came up with ways, things that we could at least do fairly quickly to try and control some of the speeding, make it less dangerous, and the suggestion that if you do certain things, it might be less desirable to travel those streets. That remains to be seen. So we'll adjourn till next month, and hopefully we can come to a little bit more of a consensus. Okay? Thank you. Sure. Just press so we can hear you.
I received the map of the study recently, and with a note on the bottom that said, if you have a question, email, whatever. And I did email, but I never got an answer.
Okay.
My question was, the map and information that I got about the traffic and the counts had no dates on when that study was done. It had multiple pages with no dates.
We can give you the dates.
Yeah, there was no dates on that. There was a study done, and it said traffic this way and that way, but there's no date on when that number comes
Okay.
from.
So before you leave, they'll give you the dates.
Yeah, and any other printouts that they do, they should put the dates on it when the study was particularly done. And also, I could not turn it around. The map was upside down. I couldn't turn it around on the screen. There was no little digital thing where you usually click to turn it so you could see it. It was like upside down. I just sent it the way it was sent. So I couldn't read
Okay.
it at all. That's it, but, you know, to have it sent right away with dates, that's,
Okay. So we will see you in March. All right. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.